We're here on We the People Radio Network, lighting the fires of liberty one heart at a time. Give us a call. Participate in the conversation, 512-646-1984. And I'm here with Harmon Taylor. We're talking about Admiralty law. Avast ye, mates. Put your backs into it. I'll have you keel hauled. It's all about commerce. And commerce is an interchange of goods or commodities, especially on a large scale. And when we go into courts of law here, which body of law are we talking about? We've already established that there are different bodies. Is it common law, equity law, admiralty law? What are we in when we go to court?
The place to look for the answer to that question is the flag. The flag will tell us what is the predominant fundamental choice of law for that forum. At the threshold, there's the choice of law between the law of the land and the law of maritime.
Law of the sea.
Right. Now, the law of the sea, we can call it that if we understand that we're not just talking about the sea. If we understand that the law is divided at that level, at the threshold, into two pieces, land and not land, then we understand it. The not land part actually consists of two pieces and not just one. We're not just talking about the water. We're also talking about the air. So we've got the law of the land as one choice of law, and matters arising or accruing relating to the land would ordinarily, in just the unperturbed circumstance, be governed by, is what I'm trying to say, governed by law of land. Everything else would be governed by maritime law.
So if you're on the water or if you're in the air, anything that is not land, you got, land, water, and air. If it's not land, then it's ruled by maritime law. For those people who are silly enough to hijack an airplane, you are now accused and guilty of air piracy.
Exactly.
Literally, the same thing that's happening when you show up with the black flag with the skull and crossbones, and it falls under that same body of law.
Exactly. It's the same concept.
And the same concept, yes.
Yes, the same choice of law and the same criminal behavior. It's just a different place.
So you say that ordinarily, unperturbed, we would be, governed by common law of the land.
Right. Our normal interaction commercially and in every other way would be subject to the law of the land.
Has our situation been perturbed to change that at all?
It's been perturbed so dramatically that it truly is difficult for most even to want to know how different it is now from what we think it is and what we've been told that it is. Yes, it's been perturbed, massively perturbed.
Now, if I understand, it has been perturbed because of commerce. And this is the conduit or the link that draws us into admiralty law or maritime law. And again, the law of the sea has always been about commerce. Even today, you go out into the middle of the ocean, there's nobody there except tankers and cargo boats. I mean, huge ships that are engaged in commerce. I mean, you may find an occasional sailboat where somebody silly as me might be trying to sail around the world, but for the most part, the ocean is open primarily to those engaged in commerce. Is that true?
Well, sure. I'm satisfied that there have to be non-commercial uses of boats. I don't know, for example, how to categorize the pleasure cruise from this island to that island. You sail down to the Bahamas and you sail back. And I mean, it's tough to say that it's not commerce, but that's not the point of it. You're not down there to buy and sell. You're not
right.
transporting people or goods for hire or for profit. And it's just, anyway, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say there has to be a non-commercial use even of a sailboat.
Okay. So let's get into this Admiralty law in most of our court systems. How does that happen? You know,
there's only one way to get there, and that's by agreement.
You have to volunteer into it.
Have to volunteer into it. It has to be agreed to. Fundamentally, we cannot be compelled to agree to anything. The entire area of commerce would shut down if that were the case. And see, this is the thing. We go back to Rome. They may not have felt this any more than we feel this today, any more than the founding families and the founding fathers felt this way at the time of great conflict. But everything about Rome was entered into purely voluntarily. Purely voluntary. Everything about what happened in 1770s here, purely voluntary. And it had been purely voluntary all the way up until that point. What we're dealing with today is purely voluntary. And no other way that system can hold together.
So when do we volunteer into this Admiralty, and is it obvious to us, or is it are we making these decisions based on some misinformation?
Well, a lot of misinformation. No, nothing's obvious. What we're dealing with now wouldn't work if we saw it. If we realized what it was, if we understood the duality, if we recognized it for what it was, if they marketed themselves, the people behind all this, marketed themselves, marketed their system for exactly what it was, it would never have gotten out of the starting gate. So, no, it can't be obvious and work the way it's working.
Okay. So let's go back to 1913 and 1933. What did those years have to do with any of this?
Well, in 33, of course, we've got FDR. And the key thing that comes to mind there is the switch out of the money system. In part, there's a major switch out of the money system. When we get into money, we can see that there's language out there in these books called codes or books called statutory codifications that address money, at least sort of. But there's nothing out there in print that actually defines this thing called a dollar. And the reason that matters is just to understand that where we are dealing with money, we're at this interesting area in the law called a political question. We adopt money as a political decision, not really as a legal one. So the money system, gold and silver, is the scriptural money system. It's the money system of the Articles of Confederation. It's the money system of the Constitution. And where we don't have that, it doesn't make the alternative money system illegal or fraudulent or these sorts of things just because it's different. It just means that where we don't have the honest system of weights and measures, we have politically aligned ourselves with a very different system.
Okay, we're going to take another break, sell some stuff. We really encourage you to patronize our supporters here, our sponsors. Harmon and I will be back after this brief commercial break. Don't go away. And we're going to go to Dan in Texas. Good morning, Dan. Thanks so much for joining us and helping us light these fires.
Good morning, Michael and Harmon. Harmon, this is Dan over in Fort Worth.
How are you this morning?
I'm okay. I think you've answered my question since I hopped online. I was going to question in historical Admiralty Maritime law, where the jurisdiction of the Admiralty issue might stop, let's say, for example, at the port of Galveston. Somehow or another, the captain of that ship has brought the law up the Trinity River onto the land. And I believe you're explaining that this has happened by our acceptance and agreement into the money system and into such statutes, say, for example, as the Social Security Act and the various banking laws?
You're very, very close. Let's go back to the concept of Admiralty law on the land and then just build from there, because you're right on top of it. It's impossible for Admiralty law to be brought on the land. It is impossible for maritime law to be brought on the land. It's a very popular concept among those who are at least at that stage of realizing that we have to understand and deal with and come to terms with maritime law. It's not really on the land. It can't be. By definition, if we were on the land, the choice of law would be the law of the land. So what Rome did, what the British did with the colonies, what the current banking system is doing with and to us and societies around the world, isn't really bringing maritime law on the land. It looks that way, but what has happened is this. There's a place that has nothing to do with the land, and that's why we understand, it helps to understand, that Admiralty law, maritime law, applies not just to the water. It also applies to the air. And what that allows us to do is develop a model, a picture in our mind of a two-level or a two-layer system, a duality that's vertical. If we can picture a clear acrylic layer hovering 25 feet above the ground, then we see the place that supplies the maritime law that we're dealing with. It would be no different from being in Great Britain and having all of the agreements we enter into subject to the law of Germany, for example. It's no different. That's a lateral view. That sort of helps. I've found that it adds a lot more to the understanding to get a vertical view in mind, and where we can picture this acrylic layer. That's just a place. It's a hover zone. And that place provides for us a choice of law which is based in maritime law. So we don't ever really bring the maritime law on the land. We just pick a different place to provide the choice of law for everything that we're doing. Now, regarding the money, the money isn't the cause. The money is the result. We have funny money because we have a system that can tolerate it. If we were on the law of the land, there would be no toleration of funny money. Funny money is extraordinarily serious when we get into criminal offenses. There's one criminal offense defined in the document called the Constitution. It's in Article 3. I'll let you go read it. That's what we're talking about with funny money when it is evaluated under the law of the land. But where the choice of law for all of those activities is the choice of law of the hover zone, then it's okay to do funny money. Why? Because the choice of law for that place allows it. And they have to... Yeah.
I think this is a good time to identify that hover zone. When you and I talked yesterday, we were identifying it as this state.
Right. The federal codes will refer to things as federal zones, and the state codes will refer to it as this state. It's a phrase. It's two words, typically always lowercase, not always. Some codes capitalize the S in state. Oklahoma does that, for example. But the phrase in the statutes exists. Federal codes will create all kinds of things in this state. You know how competitive businesses will mark up their sales territories differently? Okay. In this state, you can divide up the place in any number of different ways. There's AR, AK, AZ, TX, NY, CA, all capital, two-letter capital letters. Those are federal zones. Okay, that's one way to do it. Another way to divide up this state is through districts. So Title 28, for example, divides this state up into a bunch of districts. And we just go through different codes. We find different ways that this state is divided up for purposes of that code. It's no different from having a sales territory for Coca-Cola and a sales territory for Pepsi and a sales territory for Dr. Pepper, sales territory for Sprite. Okay? Just all of them have the same geography to deal with, but they have different ways to divide up that territory. That's what happens with the statutory codes. So, yeah, that probably is a good time to put that in. The question that you've asked is great, and yes, there's direct connections between everything you said there. The money system, Social Security, the statutory plans, all of that is related. And all I'm doing here, all I hope I'm doing here is adding just a little bit of refinement of cause and effect. And the reason that matters is when we discipline our mind always to go through the right sequence of events, then we can't be distracted by ideas that don't quite get it yet. So it matters that we understand that maritime law is not on the land. Why? Because we're in a very, very different place. It's as if the entire population of Great Britain had been put on a barge that's anchored in the middle of the Rhine River. That's how different the place is between the land and the place called this state, or the hover zone. You'll also hear me describe it as the Constitution-free maritime commercial zone. That's where we are.
All right, but sort of using the analogy of the dichotomy of physical versus spiritual or mind.
Okay.
If we're in a courtroom in St. Louis, Missouri,
okay,
on the land,
it won't
where
do that courtroom.
Have a Admiralty flag.
Okay, that courtroom won't be on the land.
In a building in St. Louis.
Okay.
But spiritually, we're operating in a different system.
Okay. I mean, you're making a distinction there, and I'll recognize that distinction. It's not really just spiritual, but I will tell you that the spiritual component has everything to do with it. That's a different part of it. But yeah, you're right. The building's on the land. The choice,
meaning to suggest that physically we're obviously located on the land.
Okay.
Where Admiralty cannot happen.
Correct.
So in mind, we're operating in that zone that's hovering above us.
Yes. Now, the way you've described it there is perfect. In mind. In mind. See, and we don't even have that consciously in our mind, but you're right. If we can think about it the way you've described it, there's a perfectly legitimate way to think about it. Because that concept of what's in our mind is where we get to the choice of law when we start making the agreements.
You fellas have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Dan.
More than appreciate the call.
Yeah, you have a great weekend, too. We're at the top of the hour. It's going to be a very short break, and we'll come right back. We've got Gene in Georgia and Sean in Texas on the line. We'll be going to them after this brief commercial break. Don't go away. We are here this morning lighting the fires of liberty. My co-host is Harmon Taylor, a former bar-certified attorney who is now working outside of that system. And we're going to go to Gene in Georgia. Good morning, Gene. Thanks so much for calling in.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning, Harmon and Michael. Let me phrase this into a statement so I can put my opinion in instead of just a question, and then maybe we can get to a more accurate result on what I'm really asking. Let's say we have a individual who has not volunteered into any of their jurisdictions. His status is pure with his God-given right act. The question, I guess, is how would the Supreme Court of the United States rule? And the question is, does such a person have to pay direct taxes? That's the question.
It's an excellent question. You've set up the circumstances very well, and it may take a few minutes to address this, but I'm going to start this way. The statement and the question presume into existence some things that really are not accurately understood at the premise. Well, we can just use Ed and Elaine Brown. I mean, we just talked about them on that email, and what is their circumstance? The circumstance is they have volunteered into the system. The question is, how does that happen? And the answer is commercially. It's not a matter of anything that anybody really understands. I'm going to tell you really briefly what that is so that as you reflect on this information, you'll understand why the premise, it's a popular one. It's why I really appreciate your question. You're asking a popular question. You're asking a question that millions and millions and millions of us ask. And so here's the answer. The system that we're dealing with is commercial. It does not have authority until the individual agrees to it. The question is, where's the voluntary act that is the basis for this thing that we call the income tax obligation? It is not a direct tax. If we will go back to the Pollock decision, the first one, there's two. Read the Pollock decision, and after we wade through a few hundred pages of preliminary discussion by the lawyers about direct and indirect taxes, we get to the justice's opinion, and in that opinion is the very first paragraph of it. And in the very first paragraph of that opinion, in the first Pollock decision, which is, if my memory is serving at all this morning, that's 1895, what the court says there is the claims inequity to basically to keep the fiduciaries of the system from inappropriately spending money. And I'd have to read the paragraph. It's in the primer. If you want to download the trust primer,
I can read that for us. Would you like to read it?
Yeah, you got that right there. Read that paragraph.
Pollock versus Farmers Trust and Loan, 1895. Quote, to review, reflect on the fact that at the time of the original 1894 income tax program,
just jump down to where it's Chief Justice Fuller. That'd be about third of the way down that page. It's indented.
I don't see it indented. I've got the last page. Oh, well, okay. Mr. Chief Justice Fuller, after stating the facts in the foregoing language, delivered the opinion of the court. Quote, the jurisdiction of a court of equity to prevent any threatened breach of trust in the misapplication or diversion of the funds of a corporation by illegal payments out of its capital or profits has been frequently sustained. Do you want more than that?
That's the key concept. No, that's the perfect concept. There's a little bit more there. But we've got equity, we've got trust, we've got the concept of illegal payments. We go on in that next sentence to talk about breach of trust or duty.
This bill proceeds on the ground that the defendants would be guilty of such breach of trust or duty in voluntarily making a return for the imposition of and paying an unconstitutional tax, and also on allegations of threatened municipality multiplicity of suits and irreparable injury.
Right, so there's a little bit of cloudy language in that, but what the court is doing there is identifying exactly what the basis of the claim was. From that very next sentence, which isn't in that primer, through the next, I don't remember, 100, 150 pages, is a discussion that talks about direct and indirect taxation, which has absolutely nothing to do with what he just got finished talking about.
So it's misdirection, but it's a court of equity.
Court of equity.
And it's a threatened breach of trust.
Right. Where are trusts governed? By what body of law do we get into trust analysis? Equity. They're telling us from the very, 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 very beginning. The Supremes have stood on the soapbox. They've taken Speaker's Corner. They've taken the megaphone, and they've said, hey, this is what's going on. And they just do this so diplomatically. They just do this so smoothly. I mean, to tell you, they are a godsend in how they handle these things. We have the duty to translate. This translation says, this case proceeds in equity because we're talking about a beneficiary, this is Pollock, trying to stop the fiduciary, namely the directors of that company, from committing criminal fraud, from committing embezzlement. By doing what? By diverting funds away from the stated beneficiaries to an undisclosed, unidentified, previously unknown beneficiary. So they take the trust, the directors of that company, Farmers Loan and Trust, I believe, wanted to pay the 1% or the 2% income tax. And Pollock said, over my dead body. Well, he didn't say that, but that's what he was communicating. And the Supreme Court said, that's right. He's a beneficiary. He's a stockholder. He owns an equitable interest in this commercial enterprise, and he does not consent to it. Now, if the fiduciaries had the consent of all the beneficiaries, it'd be fine. But he doesn't have unanimous consent. There's one equitable interest holder out here that says, no, we're not doing that. So they don't have 100% consent by the beneficiaries, which means if the fiduciaries go ahead and divert that fund to a non-identified beneficiary, they commit the crime called embezzlement. It's just that simple. Okay, we take that as the model and we say, now that's a very interesting case. Why are we talking about a direct or indirect tax with the introductory paragraph talking about equity and illegal payments and breach of guilty of being a breach of trust? And the answer is the entire income tax system is a trust obligation. The key term there is the term taxpayer. The term taxpayer in the code is not defined. The definition of the term taxpayer comes one taxpayer at a time, and it will be found in commercial agreements. The typical place for it is in the phrase taxpayer's ID number.
Okay.
It is right there in our face. There's nothing hidden. There's nothing not disclosed. We just don't have a clue what the word game is that we're being made subject to.
Can I get back to my question?
Good.
Let me get back to this question again. Let's say you have an individual or a person, a natural-born person who has not given up his God-given rights.
Well, he will have. Does this person have a bank account? Does this person have a bank account?
Let's say his status is pure. Let's say his status is pure. He has not given up his God-given rights. And let's not just look at the income tax. Let's also look at the property tax. And let's say
that's a totally different game. Totally different game. We just switched from the game of life to Yahtzee. We just went from Monopoly to chess.
That's correct. Because what I'm asking is, does an individual who has not given up his God-given rights, does he have to pay direct taxes of any kind? Not under the Constitution, but considering that the U.S. government exists and the Supreme Court exists with, the Constitution. So,
okay, well, I mean, they exist And I'm still going to come back and challenge your premise, and here's why. The place where we exist right now is in a maritime place. Whether one has or hasn't given up rights has everything to do with their commercial behavior. And for me to be satisfied that we're actually talking about the same thing, I have to know whether the person that you think hasn't given up God-given rights has a bank account or a credit union account or a savings account or...
Harmon, just on a hypothetical, just taking his question literally, is it possible that this person does not require to pay taxes? Now, I think you and I understand that the possibility of never having given up your God-given rights is not very likely. But given the premise, that's the whole issue, because everything about this is in the premise, which is why I'm spending so much time on. Okay, let's move through that. Yes, the party can be made to pay direct taxes. Let's talk about a direct tax. Let's presume a constitution and let's presume a legislature or a Congress with it. Congress funds its operations through what I call the congressional diet, D-I-E-T, duties, imposts, excises, and direct taxes. The thing that most people don't understand about direct taxes is this. The direct tax, when it first came up in the Philadelphia Convention as a concept, was voted down. Why? Because as phrased, the concept was the new national system would have direct access to the people. And they said, no, we're not going there. That sounds too much like what we've been through. We're not going to go through that again. So what did they vote in when they went through the concept of direct tax? The direct tax is not placed on the people. The direct tax is placed on the treasuries of the member states. So when we deal with a direct tax in that premise, which doesn't apply to anything that we're dealing with, but if we go in that premise, then yes, the people will end up paying a direct tax, but it won't be directly.
Now, that is a federal direct tax. That's a federal direct tax. Now, let's get back to the property tax.
There's no such thing as a federal direct tax. It's why I'm challenging the premise. There is no such thing today that is a direct tax. If there is a financial obligation, it will exist by one and only one mechanism, and that is a private obligation. The entire discussion about direct and indirect taxes is a great intellectual exercise that has nothing to do with our legal reality.
This is fun. I want to thank Gene for his great questions, and I'm loving this battle of the titans here. We have more program. Don't go away. Gene, stay on the line, and we'll come back to you after this brief commercial break. My co-host is Harmon Taylor, and we are talking about tax law. Gene from Georgia is here and posing some technical questions. From my point of view, what I think is happening is that we're getting kind of caught up in definitions. Gene is asking really good questions. Harmon is asking from another point of view. And we also have Desi Andrews. And so what I'm going to do is let Harmon and Gene finish up, and then I'll bring Desi in. We'll do a three-way, and I will try to referee this little wrestling match of ideas. So
let me make a statement.
Okay.
All right. This is what I believe. I believe that even if one's status is pure and one has not given up their God-given rights, people such as those would still be forced to pay property taxes because the government believes they have that right, because the system believes it has that right. And I think it goes back to their deception in what they claim is common law They do not believe that we have God-given rights pursuant to God's law. They basically tell us that common law is whatever they say is law. In other words, the judges decide what the common law is, and it's basically a serf or a feudal system whereby we have crown law. They're basically supplanting our true common law with crown law, whereby they have the right to tell us we have to pay property taxes for the school board or for whatever reason.
Well, let me give Harmon a couple seconds to respond to that, and then I want to bring Desi into the conversation.
You're into an area that's very popular. There are a lot of people who see this the way you see it, and at that point in time, when you're interested in understanding how it really works, we'll discuss it again. There's nothing there in the way of a private obligation. I mean, nothing there in the way of a tax that exists by anything other than a private obligation. Nothing's forced. Nothing. Everything is agreed to, and the objective is to understand where and how.
Okay, I think we all agree that the system is broke, and we're discussing how we think it is broke. And I want to add Desi to the conversation. Good morning, Desi. How are you?
Hi, Michael. How are you?
I'm great. Did you have, I know that you have comments.
Well,
go ahead.
First of all, as far as the income tax is concerned, in 1939, February 10th, in an act to codify and consolidate, the Congress brought all the laws and parts of laws concerning internal revenue together and repealed them all. They've never been reenacted. The 1954 code was a code to revise the 1939 Act, which was repealed, and the 1986 Act was a code to reform the acts that had been repealed. The taxing power that they assume What? Hello?
I don't know where that sound came from. Yeah.
Okay. The system under which they operate is under conventions, and they treat us as though we're in a territory. They have the right to tax in a territory under convention, and that's the premise under which they come. However, we don't believe that we live in territories. We believe that we live in one of the several states or one of the union states, in which we're guaranteed a Republican form of government in which the Constitution would apply. So it's all subterfuge, and I don't believe in this. You can get in or out of the system, or you're pure, or you're not pure, or you have a bank account, or you've touched it, so you stand with the tar baby. I don't believe that my unalienable rights can be taken from me. I don't believe that I can waive them. I don't believe I can give them away. I believe that we deal with a system that uses, Harmon is absolutely correct, everything is voluntary. You just have no idea when it is you volunteer, but I've never seen the contract to which I volunteered if I did in fact.
Harmon?
Where she ended up there is the exact question. I would rephrase it slightly. I would call it an agreement instead of a contract. And, yeah, it's a paradigm shift. Just because this is the first time you've heard it, maybe, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to make sense the first time you hear it. It may not make sense after the 100th time that you've heard it. It's why we talk about it more than once. But unalienable rights cannot be taken, but they certainly can be waived. And where the individual enters into the agreement that produces that obligation, it's not a matter of waiver. It's a matter of having agreed to do the duty.
But in order to agree to do the duty, you have to have full disclosure, and I don't believe that's ever been disclosed. I don't believe that anybody has ever entered into a contract with these bums that's had full disclosure. So I have no idea what the contract is, having never seen one. And I can no longer assume or presume that there is such a contract unless I can see the terms.
Well, I mean, don't yield that position, but I'm going to address part of what you're talking about this way. You're applying a common law or law of the land contract evaluation standard to an agreement that's formed in the hover zone. It is like making an agreement under the law of Great Britain and then evaluating it under the law of Germany.
Well, Well, I understand about this state. I understand all those things, but for me, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't exist. It's the emperor with no clothes. And I don't give it any credibility because it has none. And you take the words and all this stuff, take commissioner and collector and secretary and all those things. The Secretary of Puerto Rico is tasked with the business of collecting taxes. However, if they've never prescribed, they've never signed on to the subtitle A of the Internal Revenue Code, so therefore they don't have any taxes in Puerto Rico. However, if they did, which is a possession or a territory, however, if they did, the Secretary of Puerto Rico would keep the taxes. So under that same contract or that same theory or that same convention or whatever it is they presume to use, if the several states were collecting taxes, the several states would keep the taxes and it wouldn't be sent to the treasurer or the secretary or anybody else. All of those words that they use have absolutely no meaning because statutes at large in the very beginning set up collectors appointed by Congress. And there is nothing anywhere in any of this stuff that says that I have to pay tribute of my earned money to a Treasury Department that exists under the Executive Department that's not under Congress.
It's not tribute. You're right about the structure of the system. It's not tribute, and it's not anything that a statute can make anybody do. And I'm obviously not going to satisfy your mind today. You've obviously put a lot of time and effort into this. Most people that are this confident about their position do. And congratulations for doing all of that. You're so close to getting it. All I'm going to say is never yield your position for demanding proof of the agreement.
Well, I don't yield my position. They do this by subterfuge, and they do this by tacit agreement. I understand that totally.
It's not tacit. It'll have a signature on it. Ed and Elaine Brown will have an agreement with their signature on it. We're going
to break it here. I'm loving this. We are here on We the People Radio Network. We're going to do a commercial break, and then we'll be back. We have another half hour. We'll talk to you some more. My co-host is Harmon Taylor. We've gotten into a discussion on the income tax, and I'm going to go to Mark in Texas. Mark?
Good morning.
Good morning. Do you have a comment to add to the mix?
Well, to the income tax, I'm really excited about Ron Paul and his plans for it. I've learned a great deal about it, but I have a comment on one of the biggest violations of informed consent in this country. It's something I've been working on, and it has to do with the water fluoridation in America.
Thank you. I'm really not interested in. Call me, and we'll do that as a separate show.
That's fine.
But I don't want to get off topic right now. Thanks. Okay. All right, we're going to go to Sal in New York. Sal.
Good morning, everyone.
How are you?
You still? Okay.
Good morning.
I have some premises that I would like to bring forth. First, I believe everybody in this country is human, and that we all have the same quantity and quality of rights. Therefore, where does one human have the authority to tell another human to turn over their property?
Are you ready for an answer?
Yeah.
Do you have a credit card?
No, I don't.
Do you enter into agreements at the grocery store?
As far as what?
Do you steal the groceries, or do you trade for them?
They have product to sell. I go in there, and I pay for those products.
Okay, so you enter into an agreement, and therefore the trade of property is a fully legitimate thing. Right?
Excuse me?
If you enter into okay, someone's going to come paint your house. He comes and he paints your house and you don't pay him. I will tell you that he has a right to go into court and compel you to part with the amount of money that you agreed to pay him.
Correct.
Okay. If we understand that scenario, then that's the answer to your question. From where comes the authority? And the answer is in an agreement.
Right. And if the agreement is satisfied, where do they get that authority?
From the parties to the agreement.
And I think
the agreement has been satisfied. The agreement has been satisfied. I paid the man who painted my house.
Okay, well then he's done.
It's been satisfied.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. You're talking of taxes. Where does another human have the authority to tell somebody else they have to turn over their property? If
we're talking about taxes, we just got to the premise I wanted to address there early. We're not talking about you and me entering into a deal. We're talking about an agreement with an entity. It's no different from going up to the gas station and pumping gas. There's an agreement there. So where comes the authority? See, what you're hitting on right here, the timing of your question couldn't be better. What we started off with one caller was a right in the system out there to do these things, and that started about 50 years ago and obviously is still there. The next concept is I don't believe in all of these things out there, but I defy them to prove the agreement. Okay, this is right on top of it. And what you're asking is from where comes the authority for this system, for this entity that we call and they call government, to compel somebody to part with their property? And the answer is the private obligation that is being enforced. From where comes their authority? The private obligation being enforced.
And what private obligation is that?
Yes, what obligation is that?
Okay, if you really want to know the answer, I will go over it with you again. If we're talking about an income tax, there will be a commercial obligation out there by which the party will have signed and agreed to a particular 9-digit number as being a taxpayer's ID number.
I don't have a taxpayer's ID number.
Congratulations. Let me finish. I mean, really, congratulations. If you don't have that, then you don't have an income tax obligation. But let me tell you about those who have an income tax obligation. Okay? The question is, from where comes the authority? And the answer is in the agreement by which that individual animates the term taxpayer. Where does that term show up commercially?
Well,
hang on. I'm asking myself a question. We're going to lose train of thought here. Where does the term taxpayer show up commercially? And here's the answer. Bank accounts, savings accounts, credit union accounts, retirement accounts, investment accounts. It's even in insurance agreements now, and it's even in loan and mortgage agreements.
So we identify ourselves as taxpayers with a taxpayer ID number, and I think the part that's missing here is how we become fiduciaries of this trust, which is where Harmon is going. So I think this is great. Desi, you wanted to ask something else?
I think that what we've done is we've been caught in this terrible, terrible web. And so what we've tried to do is rationalize how we got here. And in rationalizing how we got here, we give these people far too much credit. The Internal Revenue Bureau, the Bureau of Internal Revenue, was initiated in 1935 in order to collect Social Security taxes, but that Social Security Act only applied to the states which were Alaska and Hawaii and the territories and possessions at that time. Alaska and Hawaii dropped out of the Social Security Act as they gained statehood. So it only applied to territories. The IRS is technically the collector for the Social Security taxes. But the Social Security, if you get your EIN number from the IRS, and again, they're the record keeper for the Social Security. If you get your EIN number from your master file from the IRS, right on the front page of every one of those things, it says VAL-1, VAL-1, which means this is an invalid tax identification number, and you cannot collect taxes under that number, and the account must be frozen. But the IRS doesn't play by the rules of the Social Security, so they continue to come out here because they maintain that you have coughed up or confessed yourself to have a taxpayer identification number, but even in their system, it doesn't fly.
Excuse me, can I say something?
Sure, Sal, go ahead.
First, factually, what is the IRS? Isn't it just a group of men and women? Factually, what is a state?
I'm sorry, Desi, what was your comment?
Everything she is talking about is a mental conception.
Yes.
Which the gentleman in Austin didn't say it, but I'm saying it's a mental conception.
Exactly.
These statutes are a mental conception. They're the will of the legislature.
Right.
So we need to deal in facts, not in mental conceptions. And the code is just the will of the legislature. What gives them authority over me? You're telling me it's a Social Security number?
I'm not, no.
No, not you. Harmon is saying that because it's a Social Security number.
Yes, that's right.
I didn't sign that document.
Well, I think that the question is not Social Security number versus taxpayer ID number, but when we volunteer into that. And I think that it's Harmon's position that when you get a bank account, there's in that fine print that we typically don't read because we're in a hurry to open a bank account, that we identify ourselves and agree to have a taxpayer ID number, and that is where they are, getting us involved.
But, Michael, by their own rules, that's an incorrect taxpayer identification number. They can't use a domestic Social Security number in order to collect Social Security tax. They can't do it. So, by their own rules, it's defective.
You can't open an account without one now. Years ago, you were able to. They're forcing the people to have this, otherwise they can't have an account.
I totally agree.
I love this discussion. Please don't go away. We have a commercial break. It's the last one, and then we come back for 10 minutes. And Pete Hendrickson has called us from Michigan. So we're going to have a good time here in the last 10 minutes. Don't go away. My international listeners, you are listening to Michael Badnarik here on We the People Radio Network, and we have been discussing the income tax. My co-host this morning is Harmon Taylor, former bar-certified attorney, and we have Desi Andrews on the line from Austin, Sal from New York, and Pete Hendrickson has joined us from Michigan. I want to point out that we all agree that the government is screwing us over. We disagree on how they are screwing us over, and I think this discussion is fantastic. In the last 10 minutes that we have, try to keep your comments concise, and perhaps we can come as close to the truth as possible. But I'm going to go first to Pete, who's just joined us. Good morning, Pete.
Good morning, Michael. How are you doing today?
I'm very well. Let's go ahead and get it rocking and rolling.
Okay, well, we'll do that. In response to a couple of comments just before the break, I want to point out there is no tax on simply having had an account number assigned to you of any kind. There's no tax on any state of being. There's no tax on having a bank account or anything like that. The tax is on taxable activities. That's all that the income tax is associated with is taxable activities. It's measured by the dollars produced in the conduct of those activities, but it's you no more are a taxpayer or subject to a tax because you've got a Social Security number or a TIN or a bank account or anything else than you are a driver just because you have a driver's license in your pocket, even though you're just walking. That driving is the thing that makes you a driver, and engaging in a taxable activity is the thing that makes you a taxpayer or at least potentially subject to the tax. It's just that simple.
Can I say something, Pete?
Please.
First of all, I totally agree with you, but I also totally agree with Sal. What he's trying to
Whose comments I may not have heard, I'm afraid. I just got alerted to this conversation by my good friend Doug Bell just a few minutes before the break, so I don't really know what's been said earlier.
All right, Pete, what Sal is saying is, I do not believe that the Internal Revenue System exists. I've never seen it, tasted it, met it, and it damn sure can't come over to my house and have Sunday dinner. So if it doesn't exist, it doesn't exist.
I have everybody.
That means. It is listed. It is listed in the table of organization under the Department of Treasury, and anybody
it is not entitled.
Oh no, it absolutely is. If you, in fact, I have a link to their website where it is listed, posted at losthorizons.com, and you're welcome to go there. I know this is a long-standing fallacy about the IRS, not being an agency of the federal government or something like that. Simply not true. But anyway.
All right, Pete, I have a problem. First off, an IRS agent factually is just a group of people.
Sure, it's an accounting department.
It's just a group of men and women.
Uh-huh.
And the other problem I have is you telling me, what is a taxable activity?
Well, the taxable activity is doing something gainful, making use of federal property prerogatives or powers.
What federal property do I own?
I'm not saying that you engage in a taxable activity. Who is this? Is this Sal?
Sal.
Yeah, Sal. I'm not saying that you engage in a taxable activity. The odds are pretty fair that you don't. Most Americans don't. However, what happens is when people pay you, they create a sworn statement, an affidavit, known as an information return, that says that you engaged in taxable activities in connection with whatever payment you received from them. And a copy of that gets sent to the IRS. A copy of it gets sent to you, too, so that you know that testimony has been made about you. The question is, what do you do when that testimony has gone into the record? Do you respond to it and say, hey, you know what? They're saying I engaged in a taxable activity in connection with these gains, but, I didn't really. All I was doing was working in the private sector making money, and there's no tax on that. Here's my testimony rebutting that erroneous allegation.
Right.
Do you do that? If you do that, then the system says, oh, sorry, we were wrong. I have hundreds and hundreds of readers of Cracking the Code, the Fascinating Truth About Taxation in America's victories posted on losthorizons.com, people who did just exactly that and got complete refunds of everything that had been withheld from their earnings and turned over to that, including Social Security and Medicare contributions, by the way, just because they knew what the law actually says and they knew how to do what I just described. It really is just that simple. It isn't that there's this big fiction about people's earnings. What it is there's a process that goes into play, and people simply don't understand what the process is or what to do about it.
And I'm saying the whole process has been a fraud from the beginning.
Well, yes and no. I mean, there's certainly a great deal of exploitation of ignorance going on. The very fact that people are encouraged to create these affidavits when they don't even know what it is they're saying when they sign them. Everybody making a payment to somebody else in this country produces one of these things. They've just been trained to do that. That's the only part of it that, sort of gets into the neighborhood of fraud because, they shouldn't be doing that in the first place. They certainly shouldn't be doing it not knowing what the legal effect of their actions is. And the IRS should not be encouraging them to do it. However, the IRS is not ordering any to. It simply is saying things, taking advantage of confusion about terms in the law. Terms like employee and wages and trade or business and other things that have custom definitions don't mean what most people think of when they hear those phrases. They actually mean things quite different. But the IRS knows that people are confused about that, so it sends out notices to everyone saying, you have to report any economic activity associated with your trade or business. They don't tell people trade or business only means what it's defined as in the law. They let people assume that trade or business means any of your economic activities.
Exactly.
And they take full advantage of that misunderstanding. But it isn't quite fraud. I mean, but I'm not really disagreeing with you. It's constructive fraud, perhaps. You could say that it's pretty darn close.
Yes, but still, the statute is just the will of another human being.
Yeah.
It is not factual.
Well, yeah, I understand that point too, and that gets to a very deep issue of the nature of government.
It is stated in the law dictionaries, and you can also find it in John Manufacturing versus Augusta, where they state it. It's just the will of the legislature.
But Sal,
yes, well, there's no question that that's what it is, and then really the issue becomes, do we have a structure with a legislature at all, or do we move to pure anarchy? And as I said, that's a pretty it's a deep and complex thing to discuss. There certainly are cases that can be made for that, although I think there also are cases that
Desi, I want to let Desi comment. Go ahead.
I was saying that what people are abiding by is code, and code is merely prima facie evidence that there might be a law, and it is not the law, and people always respond to the code. They don't go to the statutes at large and look to see what the actual maybe law is. I'm not sure there is a law since 1862, but since the original Congress went out. But the least you can do is look to see the underlying statutes, which say that a collector can sue or be sued. A collector has to be appointed by Congress. A collector has to be. When's the last time the collector sued anyone? The United States of America brings suit against people for tax crimes, allegedly, but yet these same people never received a notice of demand from the United States of America, which allegedly is the collector. Where did he come from?
I'm going to give Jakob from Pennsylvania about 30 seconds. Jakob, good morning.
Good morning, Michael. Yeah, Harmon, I've got a question for Harmon. Harmon, would you say that pretty much all of society falls under that 80% category in Michael's classroom?
Describe the 80%.
Well, the 80% were willing to play the game.
Oh, I agree with you completely.
Right, and whether willingly or unwillingly, we subscribe to that, and what really gives them their legitimacy is their tanks and their guns and their jail cells.
What gives them their legitimacy is our signature on the paper.
We give sovereignty to government, but we create that sovereignty, and then we, the people, should work to take that back from them when they are operating immorally. And I think we can all agree that this government is about as immoral as they come. So therefore, that other 20% that doesn't want to play the game, I'm all for them, to do whatever they can, either take this unjust actions from this government, take it from their hands and change this government, as Michael has mentioned many times. It's time to do that, and we can't do that.
I'm going to thank you for everybody's comments. Harmon, you got about 10 seconds here. I want to thank you for being my co-host. Kind of conversation got a little bit carried away, but I've enjoyed it. Harmon Taylor, I lost you somewhere. Desi Andrews, Pete Hendrickson, Sal from New York. Definitely a controversial issue. We will do this again. We're going to try to come down to the truth of this matter, and I'm not even sure I know what it is, but it is certainly something that brings the passion of liberty to everybody's heart. Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend, and I will be back on Monday morning. Talk to you then.